And we're live. Sliding into position in the last moment. G'day, Stefan. Stefan's here. Stefan is here from Iceland. Rob, from the UK. It's rare I'm going to say this, but our weather here is worse at the moment than whatever it is in the UK for you, Rob, and Stefan as well, for that matter. Well, yesterday, Stefan sent me a photo. What do you say? It's like, it feels like summer, and it's like 10 degrees. It's all relative, isn't it? What was it, Stefan? Yeah, 10 degrees. I was sending one back, said it feels like winter, because it was 22 degrees here. Anyway, today it's all thunderstorms, which is not, it's not great, is it? Anyway, can't complain. 300 days of sunshine a year, and when it deviates, we're like, wow, what's going on? Alrighty. Speaking of what is going on, Stefan went up to 13 degrees. You get the sunscreen out, mate, for 13? Where are we? I did this only like 4 days ago, didn't I? Because I did it on Monday because of travel. And now we're back in sync. We're back on the right cycle. I'm going to try and start scheduling these in advance as well. I feel that seems to help with the viewership. G'day, Stephen. Come on. So I think I'm going to try and start scheduling it for around about this time. Every Friday or every Saturday? When do I normally do it? Oh, I don't know. It's all confusing here. It's a public holiday here as well today. It's Anzac Day, which is our day of, I was going to say rememberation, day of memory for fallen soldiers of wars past. So the school system's different. The shops are different. Monday was a public holiday, I think, because it was Easter. I'm not sure because I work for myself and it's all a blur anyway. Anywho, where were we? Oh yeah, 1Password. This week's sponsor. G'day, Matthew. Thanks for joining. This week's sponsor is 1Password. It probably doesn't really need much of an introduction. At this point in time, extended access management, securing every device on every app. Did I say that? Every app on every device. 6:30. I've been going an hour and a half, so I am coffeinated up. I don't sound coffeinated up, do I? Caffeinated up. But 1Password, extended access management. This, of course, was the tool which came via the Collide acquisition. Was it last year? Time flies. A lot happens with 1Password very quickly. It's like one moment it's a little app on my phone, the next moment I'm like watching Max Verstappen in the Formula One, and it's like 1Password across his halo in front of him. Extended access management ensures every identity is authentic, every application sign-on is secure, and every device is healthy. Simplify secure app access for users with one-click sign-ins, whilst giving IT security teams centralized control, visibility, and policy enforcement without compromising usability. This tends to be a common theme in this industry, doing security at the expense of usability. Two-factor authentication, perfect example. It makes things less usable just by adding that. And then, as I demonstrated recently, it doesn't always work anyway. We are going to try and get a little bit more material together on extended access management and where that might have made a difference to some of these data breaches we've been seeing as well. So big thanks to 1Password for their ongoing support. That is by far the longest standing relationship of any kind I've had with 1Password. And of course, they're still there on the front page of Have I Been Pwned. One of the tasks actually that we've done since I spoke last 4 days ago is on preview.haveibeenpwned.com. We now have that 1Password product placement in place as I guess it's a draft. I think it will stick the way it is. It looks pretty good. I'd like to get a little bit more context around why they're the sponsor with that prominent position. So I might think about how to do that. They will still be there in the email template as well, still be there on the search page. We are talking to other partners about their product placement for the various things that they do that 1Password doesn't, such as identity theft protection. I think I need to write a document to try and help identify which of the partners we're going to have on board there. G'day, James. Thanks for joining. Really, I guess I've mostly got two things today, which I would not have expected to have had 4 days ago. And the first one was around the speed of APIs. in particular the speed of the Pwn Passwords API. Now, we don't have a working preview to show you with this, but I did put out a tweet. I think we're still calling it tweets. I'm still going to twitter.com and it finds it. Let's find it here. Now, Stefan had actually told me about this. He said, look, I've rewritten Pwn Passwords in the new template, and he's written some new JavaScript. And Stefan, jump in here in the comments as well. But from memory, that there is a native construct that we can reliably use across platforms to create the SHA-1 hashes that we use as part of the k-anonymity search for Pwn Passwords that just ended up really, really blazingly fast. And Stefan's like, check out how fast this is. And I run it up in Visual Studio, F5 it, and I'm searching for passwords, and it just flashes. Like, what's going on? Like, it looks broken because it just flashes, but the result has changed. And what we've subsequently learned as I've run this from here, Stefan said, yep, web crypto, and now fetch instead of XHR, which of course is our cross-origin asynchronous requests. In this tweet, I've screen capped the times, and every one of these requests is executing in an average of like 35 milliseconds. Like the deviation here, I think our slowest time of, what have I got here? 7 requests. The slowest time was 34 milliseconds, or rather the fastest time. The slowest time was 40 milliseconds. So we do have a 6 millisecond spread. It's ridiculous how fast it is. And of course, it's that fast because every time we run the search, my computer here is going to the closest Cloudflare edge node and returning the result directly from there because everything is cached on the edge when you do a Pwn Password search. And it just means that the result is stupidly fast. And I didn't say it in this thread, but I had a recollection way back to the very, very beginning of Have I Been Pwned, late 2013. I know the day I launched it, but it would have been around about then. And Matthew's picked up on the point here. He said, problem, 30 milliseconds is too quick for user interactions. Yeah, exactly. And this is what we're going to get to. But I had this recollection of back in the early days of Have I Been Pwned, the full breach search on Azure table storage was so fast that the transition that I had built into the client-side JavaScript, where from memory that something would come down, it would sort of say searching, and then it would go, okay, let's get the result, and then come back up. The search was running asynchronously. It was so fast, the thing wasn't actually coming down before it went back up, and it looked like shuddery and jaggedy and messy. And I had to literally slow it down on the client. And for years and years after that, every now and then I'd see a tweet somewhere. I was like, hey, remember when Troy actually had to slow down Have I Been Pwned because it was too fast to actually be usable? And as Matthew's saying here, this is a good problem to have, but it's still a problem. Now, I thought this was pretty straightforward, and everyone would go, haha, that's a bit of fun. Look at how crazy fast it is. Yeah, obviously slow it down to make it usable. And in like classic good old Twitter style, a bunch of people were convincingly wrong in their responses. Is convincingly wrong the right term? They said with great authority that I was wrong, but they were wrong, and I'll explain why. Matthew's kind of nailed it here. Oh. The problem we've got, and I'll link through to the tweet here in the comments, and then you can have a look at the video. The problem we've got here is that when I'm pressing the enter key to do the search between results, I'll see this come through in a second, the screen just it flashes. And when I say it flashes, it is the fastest flash that you could have and still see it. It's lightning fast, this flash. And it looks glitchy. There's no smooth transition from one state to the other. And then the only thing that's actually changing here on the screen for several of these searches is the number. The password has been seen. Let's see, we'll go back to the first one. The password has been seen 21 million something times. And then it's like, flash. And then it says the password has been seen 852,000 times. And one of the only reasons you can actually see that it's changed is because going from 21 million to 852,000 has got 2 less characters on the screen, and the top sentence compresses a little bit, but it just flashes, and that's it. And it's a really unnerving user experience. And what I really want to see And we can still do this in, let's say, triple digit milliseconds. For the sake of argument, 500 milliseconds. What I want to see, Stefan, maybe we throw this to Ingeber as well. I want to see a transition from one state to the other that makes it clear you've done a search. For argument's sake, in real time, like that, half a second. James is saying, maybe I'm missing something, but shouldn't it be easy to change the transition? Yes, it should. It will be easy. This is a draft. This is a first cut. Now it's raining properly, so I'm going to close my window here in case there's background noise. Shame. Wanted to go to the beach. Anyway, yes, James, it is an easy problem to solve, but it's a fun discussion to have how this is actually a problem. Stefan says it's all about perception. I once had a Windows app that clients complained about being slow to start up. We had a splash screen which demonstrably slowed down the startup of the app, but they were happier. And there is a little bit of like mind tricks with this about making it just feel like a nice experience. And this is what I think people missed, because I had a number of comments. Steph and I were chatting offline. We're like, gee, that one blew up, didn't it? We had a number of comments where people were like, if you're slowing it down, you're doing it wrong. You know, we should get away from this attitude that APIs shouldn't be as fast as possible. And it's like, okay, first of all, mate, we're not going to slow down the API itself. So we're not going to make it so that there's some arbitrary delay server side on the API. We're going to still make that API go as fast as possible. But on the client side with JavaScript, we can asynchronously call out, get that response as fast as possible, and still do the little movie transition-y thing at whatever pace we decide is the most usable. In fact, the great thing about this is that when it's that fast, it's never the HTTP request which is the bottleneck. The bottleneck will be, what do we feel is a nice, smooth transition between states? And that's an awesome place to be, because normally, particularly when you're searching through, how many passwords have we got, Stefan? Probably about 1 billion. And that service is being queried 13 billion times a month. Normally, your bottleneck is, how do I make my API go fast? We don't have that. We've got a much, much more manageable problem here. Matthew said the trick is to artificially show an animation, but not necessarily slow things down more than needed. Exactly. James says, just like every Android app with the splash screen. I think Dave from Dave's Garage was talking about that from when he was developing for Windows too. Stefan said, I can easily add a thread.sleep on the Cloudflare worker. Yeah, don't do that, mate. There is a smiley face at the end of that. He's not going to do that. Let me have a look at some of the favorite responses here, which I've ended up having to reply to. Now, okay, someone asked a good question here, and I did add to the thread later on. Chris Mayer, he says, how's it so fast? Why is no one asking about that? So to briefly recap, let's say it's 1 billion passwords we've got. So we've got 1 billion passwords. We create 1 billion SHA-1 hashes. Now, SHA-1 is not the way we would store passwords in a real life system where users were giving us their password and then coming and logging on later on. We use SHA-1 for a couple of reasons. One is that when we ingest passwords and they haven't been pwned, they come from all sorts of different places with all sorts of different levels of formatting. Sometimes hackers don't format their data particularly well, and we end up with an entire row that has PII in it. Sometimes people use their actual email address or other personal attributes of PII in the password. So by hashing that data, and of course, keep in mind, all of this is freely downloadable and open source data and code. By hashing that data, we can give this to people without immediately showing what the underlying data is. Now, yes, you can crack that, and you can easily crack SHA-1 in general, and even SHA-1, or specifically SHA-1 without assault, which is our situation. But you've got to have a source plaintext candidate in order to do the cracking. And if we've created a hash that's as a result of a bad line parse, and it's a combination of commas and delimiters and maybe some white space characters or control characters or something like that, then you're not going to have plaintext candidates to match that anyway. So we get the privacy in the circumstances where there's bad parsing or PII. The other thing it gives us is that we can then take that SHA-1 hash, 40 characters of hexadecimal, 40 characters of 16 different possible values in each one, and we slice it down into just over 1 million possible values. We take the first 5 characters of the SHA-1 hash, which means you've got 600 to the power of 5 possibilities, which is just over 1 million possibilities, and we effectively then index it, where we're like, okay, so we have 00000, and that's our hash prefix. And then we have however many, I guess it's about 1,000 different possible suffixes that are there. 00001, and then there's a different 1,000 possible. And we end up with these nicely partitioned sort of indexes of 5 characters. And then all of that gets massively edge cached at Cloudflare. So every one of their, I think there are 320 edge nodes or something around the world, has got this great big cache of 1 billion passwords in SHA-1 hash format, indexed by the first 5 characters of that hash. And then using k-anonymity, we're only making requests to the first 5 characters. And if that sounds really, really weird, I've written a gazillion things on how that preserves privacy. So it means that we can do these queries like ridiculously fast. So to Chris's question in here, how's it so fast? Well, that's how. It's a combination of partitioning the data in the way we have, implementing k-anonymity, and the big thing, of course, is that Cloudflare edge caching. James says, I would animate it to look like it was doing something cool. Maybe animate the numbers to roll like a slot machine. Wayne's here. G'day, Wayne. James, I've heard that rainbow tables are basically dead now because computers are so fast they usually don't make sense. So rainbow tables were pre-computed hashes for either character ranges. So let's say 6 to 10 characters long, lowercase letters and numbers. And they're pre-computed hashes. And they were matched to plain text pairs. So you could go and download rainbow tables on something like Rainbow Crack, and you could take your source candidate passwords from some breach system, for example, feed them into Rainbow Crack, and it would take the hashes that were there and it would match them to the hashes in storage. And if it could find that, then the plain text candidate was stored next to it and you know your password. Salting pretty much killed that. So as we started doing salting, it killed that. The other thing that made it less necessary is GPUs have just gotten so fast. I mean, I don't even know how fast a high-end consumer-grade GPU can calculate hashes now. But back when I was beginning these workshops a decade ago now, it was like 20 billion SHA-1, or I think it was 20 billion MD5 calculations a second. Now, if you can calculate 20 billion possible results per second, why do you need to pre-compute hashes or pre-compute hashes from plain text candidates in advance, where you end up with huge storage requirements to then try and query it quickly? But now we can do it quickly anyway because we can create hashes so fast. Plus, if they're salted, well, then if we're creating it on the fly, we can add the salt to the plain text candidate and we can crack salted hashes. So yeah, rainbow tables have been pretty much useless for a very long time. Now let's pimp Stefan's talk. So Stefan says, come to my talk at NDC Copenhagen. Nice, smooth. The way he slid that in there. Give you all the dirty details and tricks. So Stefan, pimp the talk in there because it was a good talk. We've got Jacob, the operator of NDC, visiting us here on the Gold Coast at the moment because we're all going to Melbourne next week, and we're talking about your talk, and so it's going to be fantastic. I'll look up when that is going to be. NDC Copenhagen Developers Festival, which is on the 8th to the 12th of September this year. You'll see Stefan there. If you go, Stefan will have stickers. We'll make sure Stefan has lots of stickers. It will be really, really cool. I have not done an NDC Copenhagen, but all of the NDCs are cool. I got a wife out of going to NDC. It was fantastic. True story. So, what were the other comments in here? Let me find the cranky ones because they're quite funny. Someone actually asked a question here. They said, and this has come up a bit. They said, have you ever thought of moving everything to Cloudflare, Workers DB and such? So effectively moving everything off Azure into Cloudflare. Cloudflare's kind of an interesting situation because for a very, very long time, Cloudflare has said, we're not a host. And usually they say we're not a host when some recalcitrant site which is legally operating, particularly like white supremacist stuff has been in the news a lot as it relates to Cloudflare. One of these recalcitrant sites stands up. They use Cloudflare to front it, in part because of all the same reasons we use Cloudflare. You get HTTPS for free and security and DDoS protection, etc. Partly because sites like that, a lot of people do want to take down, very understandably. And the interesting thing about it is Cloudflare has so regularly said, we're not a host. If there are grievances with this service, then you need to go to the host of the service, and you can submit complaints to us and we'll relay them on. But a big part of Cloudflare's model by design is privacy of the underlying service, and obfuscating what that underlying service is. And their reasoning, when they've had people get very upset, has so frequently been, we are not a host, we just transport traffic from one end to the other. You need to talk to the host if you're unhappy with the content. And I feel like increasingly, and to their credit, increasingly it's hard to make that argument because so many requests go to Cloudflare and don't go any further. I mean, we're just discussing pwned passwords here. 99.9 something % of every single request goes to Cloudflare and they return that data directly from them. Now, you could argue that that means that they're the host for that data. And as this person said here, would you put everything on Cloudflare? They have more and more storage constructs, things like Cloudflare pages where you can host websites. I mean, the entire preview site for Have I Been Pwned is a Cloudflare pages site. There is no arguing that that is hosted on that service. So I just think it's quite a interesting, outcome, given how adamant they were about not being a host, but then how cool it is that they are hosting. I was going to say becoming a host. They are hosting content. Now, would we move everything across? They're adding a lot of cool stuff very quickly, but I don't think they're anywhere near parity with a dedicated cloud service provider like Azure. Look at one just really simple example of that is there's no API management story. We have thousands and thousands of API keys that we provision for people using those services and Have I Been Pwned. We use APIM on Have I Been Pwned, API management. That doesn't exist on Cloudflare. I would love it to exist on Cloudflare. I would move that stuff over straight away if they did it. And I have said to them many, 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 many times, it would be really cool if you had an API management story. And maybe they will in the future, but that's just one example of many where they don't have parity. We are very dependent on a relational database that is now 1.15 terabytes, according to my screen over there. It's a SQL Server database. That's what we run everything in these days, most things in these days. That's where our expertise and our experience and everything is as well. So at this point, I can't see that it would make sense to move stuff like that. So interesting question, but I don't think that that's really on the cards yet. Someone else, what's the stack for this? Holy shit. Yeah, exactly. That's how fast it is. So, someone here, this is the sort of comment I was talking about. This person says, don't artificially slow it down. Let's return to a world where responsive software is the base expectation. What? What? You're misunderstanding the problem. That is such a myopia that you're going to build software that people don't like to use if you take that attitude, because it prioritizes that one aspect of design at the expense of how does it actually work for humans. Anyway, there were lots of other things that were similar to that. And that's why we do need to slow it down. We will slow it down and it will be better for it. But again, no thread sleeping. We're not going to do that. What else in the comments here? Stefan doesn't need a wife from NDC. He's still going. Yeah, your wife's nice. Keep her. James says, the cache my site I run on my home NAS. It's practically a host for a static site like mine. Cloudflare does practically become a host. I think it's a little bit of a semantic argument, to be honest. You could argue, going down this rabbit hole, that if you host James hosts his website on his NAS, and then he wraps Cloudflare around that. I think the question is, what happens if the NAS disappears? If you go offline. Now, Cloudflare's got obviously a bunch of caching, it's got some offline stuff, but sooner or later, if you can't flush through cache and contact the origin, then the site dies. So I think in that argument, they could make a reasonable argument, or that situation, they could make a reasonable argument that they're not a host and they provide optimization services, and they are still dependent on a host for the long-term viability of the service. That goes away when you have something like Cloudflare Pages, where it only exists in one place. So, and again, like that's a good thing. I just think that it's funny how that argument really doesn't fly as much anymore. Stefan says SQL with reliable backups and restore is important as well. And this is why we put so much effort last year into migrating from table storage to SQL Server, to a relational database where we can do point-in-time restores. I think the last time we did a point-in-time restore, Stefan, I feel like it took about 30 minutes or something to get that, 1 terabyte plus data and scroll back to a specific minute in recent time because you've, dropped the table or done something stupid that you shouldn't have. To be able to do that quickly and at the click of a button and restore that into a new database and then go and recover things that you need is super, super important for running a service like this. And we just couldn't do that before. So that's really important. There's a lot of other stuff we need to still do, which we know even in that SQL space. I feel like we do endless optimizations. I haven't even looked at our Azure bill lately either, Stefan. How's that going? Like, a lot of this was about trying to optimize SQL. In fact, Stefan wrote a blog post about this. Feel free to pimp that as well, Stefan, about how we've done auto scaling on SQL Azure Hyperscale to try and keep our costs as low as possible, but not have too little performance. And one of the cool things on our dashboard here, I've got to write the blog post. I've got to finish the blog post about how we're doing the dashboard running off the Raspberry Pi. One of the things that we're really trying to do here is just keep that SQL database as small as we possibly can, which would be really, really nice. Actually, this is not too bad. Our SQL costs have really not been too bad. We're averaging, I'd say we're averaging 100 and a little bit Australian dollars a day, which, we're still paying thousands of dollars a month for SQL Server. But if I look at particularly the periods where we haven't been loading a data breach and we haven't needed to scale up because we've been able to serve so much from Cloudflare's edge cache, we're actually doing about like $60 a day. I'm happy with that. Hopefully that bill's just not going to be as shocking this time when it comes in. But that is still the vast bulk of our cost. Actually, our 30-day cost for SQL Server in Aussie dollars is about $3,700. So we're just over 100 Aussie dollars. So let's call it, at the exchange rate at the moment, $65 a day to run a 1.1 terabyte database that has hundreds of thousands of users a day, which I'm pretty happy with. That's good. Still room for improvement. Still not sure why we got multiple. Yeah, we're still paying for those log analytics and things. I don't know that we need to, Stefan. Anyway, we'll get on to that. Sam says, any updates on the CoinHive project? Let's look at the stats. I haven't looked at them for a while. In short, no. No updates from me. I'm just fascinated that CoinHive is still used so much. For those of you not familiar with the CoinHive situation, CoinHive was a monetization method for websites where instead of putting ads on the website, you put a JavaScript-based Monero coin miner, and it would mine CPU cycles from every one of your visitors and convert them into some crypto. And that sounds sleazy enough already. And then every hacker worth their salt who could get script to run on someone else's website was just embedding CoinHive. So you ended up with CoinHive embedded in all of these different websites, including in some cases even on government websites, mining crypto from visitors' browsers. And you also ended up with a whole bunch of situations where even router firmware was compromised, and you would get people making outbound requests over non-secure connections, key point there. So it had to be an HTTP connection so that the router could effectively do man in the middle and inject CoinHive script, and someone would just be browsing to their local shops or whatever it is over HTTP. CoinHive gets injected and mines some more cryptos. So our, well, put it this way, last 24 hours, I still had 45,000 requests. The previous 30 days, let's have a look, 1.43 million requests over the previous 30 days. That's nuts, isn't it? Mostly from China. Of those 1.43 million, 552,000 are from China, 375,000 from the US, 100,000 from Russia, which is interesting because if you put China and Russia together, then that's almost half of all the CoinHive requests. And that is incommensurately high for those two countries as it relates to most of the traffic, certainly my projects see. After that, Ireland, Japan, Germany, Singapore, Brazil, Indonesia, and Thailand. Singapore punching above its weight too. Singapore's a small country, what, 5 million something people there? Now, we have referrers here. Yeah, we do have some referrers, which is interesting. DL-X.com. I've got to be careful where you go with these because my pie hole will probably block the naughty ones. But what is this website? Well, it doesn't support HTTPS, and now I'm getting the classic error address invalid because it couldn't do DNS resolution because the pie hole has black holed it, which means it's probably porn. That's the reason for that there. Multiple different blogs on blogspot.com, apk.vip, which I assume is just Android packages. Bago, what the hell is this one? Let me see if there's something that's clean enough that I can put on here. Then someone can see if they can find the CoinHive on it. This one is loading. All right, this is, I don't know what this is. What language is this in? Turkish, maybe? Polish, is it? I don't know. Let's see if CoinHive is in the source code of this page. Referrer headers, of course, are only coming through with a host name these days. We don't have a full path. Yes. So the link that I just put into the chat here has CoinHive embedded in it. Now, why did my JavaScript not pop up and tell you that it has CoinHive embedded in it? Because that's what it's meant to do. If I go to my pie hole is blocking CoinHive, which I did know, but I thought I had put that on the allow list. Let's have a look at this. Maybe it's because it's coin-hive.com. So there are two different variations of that domain name, coinhive.com, all one word, coin-hive.com. Let's have a look at the domains I have in my pie hole. And I do not have coin-hive. So let's add that. And then we can actually see what happens. Coin-hive.com. Oh, no, I do have coin-hive. Oh, okay. In that case, I'm going to need to figure that out another time. That should not be being blocked. So maybe folks watching this who are not using a pie hole, first of all, you should be. This is really cool. But if you go to that website that I just dropped in, you will see my little prompt pop up. Fascinating thing I find about that is, you know, in the case of this one site here, there's been 15,500 requests to that website which have loaded my script. And it's still there. And in fact, a lot of these are blog spots. Mr. Branding.blogspot, incoming gratis Indonesia.blogspot. So I can't pronounce that other one. Yeah, interesting. Blogspot. So these appear to be personal blogs where someone is, you know, they're running on Blogspot, which is Google, like it's going to be solid, but people have probably got reused credentials and dumb stuff like that. And here we are. James says he's not heard of Cloudflare pages until today. I love the GitHub integration. Stephen says, yeah, the analytics stuff is on the backlog. rebrand first. Yes, so this is me saying I think we can save some money on analytics. But James, the Cloudflare pages it's so smooth and easy. And at the moment, every time we commit to GitHub, if let's say Ingeborg doing the work at the moment, our other man in Iceland, if Ingeborg creates a branch, does some work, submits a PR, Cloudflare pages automatically picks it up and it puts it on a distinct PR specific URL, so you can preview the website on like a parallel Cloudflare pages instance. As soon as we merge the PR and it updates the main branch, then it pushes that to preview.haveibeenpwned.com, and it's very, very fast because it's just a static website, so there's very little compilation or anything to do. And as Stefan said, pages are so easy to set up. It's a lovely experience. So yeah, if you just have like a basic website, it's very, very cool. And of course, now you can use things like workers to actually do functionality and APIs as well. So basically Cloudflare is a host, which is a good thing. All right. Now here's the other thing that consumed our time this week. Let's load up the dashboard page on our preview website for Have I Been Pwned. I'll drop that in the chat. For the longest time, and when I say for the longest time, I honestly remember 20 years ago, dating myself, 20 years ago, building web applications, and you'd get to the bit where let's call it authentication, where there's authentication, username, password, access to service. And we go, what do we call it? Are we logging in? Do we log in one word? Do we log space in? Do we log on? Because you used to log on to Windows. Or do we sign in? And then when you're done, are you signing out or logging off or logging out? Or like, what's the correct nomenclature for that service? And we hadn't really given it much thought with this new redesign. And I think we had login originally as 2 words. And then I was like, no, it really should be 1 word. And then we had someone submit an issue. And he made a very good point. He's like, look, one is a verb and one is a noun. And that's why it makes sense sometimes to call the page like the login page with 1 word, but then the button, the log space in. And I'm just looking at it going, it's just consistently annoying, you know, the way the words continue to change, and it just bugged that little bit of my brain that looks at a detail thing and then gets infatuated with it. And I think a lot of us in this industry are the same. There's just that little thing that your eye picks up on that you can't let go of. So I ended up putting out a poll on X, we'll call it X this time, x.com. No, twitter.com. I can't do it. Twitter.com. Put out a poll about what's the correct word that we should be using. Now this poll hasn't completely finished yet, but the results are very, very close. So in the poll, I said, when accessing your Have I Been Pwned dashboard, which of the following should you do? Log in, all 1 word, log space in, log space on, sign space in. Now, log space on has 1.2% of the votes, so let's scratch that. I have possibly artificially influenced the results here because I blogged about it before the poll was finished. But login had 34, this was 1 word, 34% of the votes. Log space in had 27% of the votes. Sign space in had 38% of the votes. Now, we have already spent way more time talking about this than what the thing is actually worth, but there's just something about it that creates conversation. Even last night, Charlotte and I were walking out to dinner and I was saying, I told her I wrote a blog post today, this is what it was about. And she sort of said, well, how do you log into Have I Been Pwned when you might not actually have an account? You know, because part of this accessing your dashboard thing is to show things like your exposure in sensitive data breaches. So, well, does login imply that there's a username and password stored somewhere? And if that's the case, what happens if you just log in with the pass key? It's getting very, very specific. I feel like sign in, I don't know what it is. Like I feel like sign in is just a more relevant term today. And certainly all the big services, well, a lot of the big services do sign in. Microsoft, Google, what does Cloudflare do? Amazon. If I do a little bit of incognito and go to cloudflare.com, What's quite funny, in the blog post, there are various services that conflate the two. So Cloudflare is a log space in. They do that consistently on the web page. Here, the path is just /login, which again is the difference between the verb and the noun, which I don't think most people, including myself, really understand why they have to be different. But if we have a look at what I put in the blog post here, bit of classic Windows 95. Windows 95 was log space in, just in case we're building systems today based on Windows 95. But some of the things, it was kind of oddly conflicting with each other. So purely for the sake of research, I checked Pornhub because it's one of the biggest sites on the internet. And the link to, let's call it authenticate, the link to authenticate says log space in, and then you get to that page and it says sign in. So see how it kind of flicks backwards and forwards? Canva uses the verb noun approach of log in one word for the page, log space in as the actual verb, the doing thing. Commonwealth Bank in Australia is log space on. ANZ Bank is log space in. National Australia Bank, the button, the verb, just says login, one word with no space. So maybe they're using the English language wrong. And then our other big four bank, just to kind of round them out here, Westpac, is sign space in. But then, like I said, Google's sign in, Microsoft, and you never see sign in done as one word either. So I think that's part of the reason why I like it, because it can never be ambiguous. Login can be represented in two different ways. Log on can be represented in two different ways. Sign in can only ever be two words. I think that's actually the core of why I liked it. Well, thank you for that. That's just helped me realize. Newsy says, forget log space in, log space on, sign space in, etc. Just use authenticate. And you know, I did have a moment last night where I was like, why don't we just do authenticate? I think the reason why is because you got to remember this service, the vast majority of people using it are normies. I'm sticking with normies, even though it upsets some techies. So the vast majority of people are normies. They're not used to living in this world of tech jargon. And I just feel like authenticate is just a little bit too tech jargony for the masses. Mike, g'day, Mike. Mike says, evening all, in the US this week. Good luck with that, Mike. But joined at the right time. I was hoping to hear more thoughts on sign-in versus login. Yeah, agree the latter is perhaps a bit outdated. I tend to use sign-in nowadays. Yeah, well, welcome, Mike. I think we're gonna stick with that. But for those of you who built, I guess, any software in the past of any size, one of the things that just like it is like mental molasses that kind of slows me down is if I have to think about which way to do something. And it can be something as simple as a word. So after I made this decision while Stefan was sleeping in Iceland last night, I just went through the entire code base of the integration site we're building, and even things like variables and method names and controllers and views. It's just like, okay, let's make everything like this. We're just going to make everything sign in. And we're going to camel case it or Pascal case it or whatever the correct context is. So yeah, we updated JavaScript and C# code and everything just to make it consistent. So now every time we go in, sign space in. And that's it. That's what we're going to stick with. Okay, folks. Well, that was the agenda for today. Actually, the last thing I had on the agenda was just the general bits and pieces with our UX rebrand. That is powering ahead. We are still targeting a 17 of May go live date. So we have 3 weeks and a couple of days before this whole thing is going to go live. If we have a look at what's on the GitHub repository now for the UX rebuild, drop that in the chat as well for anyone who might be interested in it. We are rapidly chewing through the outstanding issues. Ingeber's quickly doing these. I'm just looking at what's on our schedule here. We have a project that isn't publicly visible, and that project literally just prioritizes the stuff that's in here. But he's making really, really good progress. Stefan's making good progress integrating everything on the website. We've got lots of just like little things to tweak here and there. Things like slowing down the pwn passwords, animation. Stefan, I was just thinking we've really got to check all the places where we need to have Cloudflare anti-automation to make sure we don't have situations where, for example, when you're already authenticated, you can then start to hammer some service that sends email, because we want to not have our service used to spam bomb someone or something like that. So there's all these little things that we just need to go through and tick boxes on, such that we get to the 17th of May and we've got something that we can launch. And maybe there'll be some wording differences or things like that we want to change over time, or some minor bits and pieces. But we've got to have a product that does everything the current one does and a bunch more, and then there'll be other things on top of that which will then drip feed out over time. Rob Davis says, when talking to law enforcement, what is their view of ransomware payments funding crime? If funding crime from ransomware payments were illegal, then hopefully they would reduce drastically. There's an interesting bigger discussion about this, and it was a really hot topic in Australia in late 2022 when we had the Medibank ransomware situation. So this is our largest healthcare provider. About half the country uses them. They got ransomed. Attackers wanted, I think it was about $11 million. Can't remember which currency. It was a lot of money. Not to a company like that, but they didn't pay. And the attackers then started dumping very sensitive personal information. They obviously wanted to make as much impact as possible. So the first thing they started dumping was a list of people who'd had abortions. Like just super personal stuff. Then a list of people who were having treatment for drug addiction and things like that. So we had a lot of public discussion about ransomware and ransomware payments. And my good friend Kieran Martin, Kieran's the guy that started the National Cybersecurity Centre in the UK. He was out here in Australia at the time, doing a lot of media and spending a lot of time with government. And he was very sort of vocal around the fact that we're not really in the position yet to make this illegal. And the reason why is that in many cases, it's the only way a business can survive is to pay a ransom, which sucks. And it feels super, super bad. Patrick Gray on the Risky Business podcast has regularly said this as well. There are businesses that get so badly hosed that unless they pay that ransom, they will die. And people will lose jobs, and services and things will disappear, and there'll be really serious impact on society, separate to the serious impact of cybercrime. The middle ground step is to be able to quantify the problem. And I'm going to get the terms wrong here, but Australia recently passed some privacy reforms that included a provision for organisations to report ransomware and not have that used against them in any legal proceedings. Because one of the concerns that companies have is they're like, if we report this, does it then turn into government action against us that results in massive fines or other adverse impact to business? So the view here, and I think it's pretty consistent in other parts of the world as well, is at the very least, let's be able to quantify the problem. Like how many people are paying ransoms and how much are they? And can we build legal constructs that encourage that information to come forward without it then leading to negative consequences for the organization who's really just trying to stay alive? I would love to see it outlawed. I would love to see us get to a point where the harms of outlawing it are less than the positives. But we don't seem to be there just yet, Rob. So maybe in the future. What else we got here? James says, first of all, Stefan's going to get the turnstile things right. That's good. Stefan, we've still got that weird glitch on the front page. So the number of times I load that front page, and it obviously comes from either Cloudflare cache or browser cache, and I put in an email address, and we just get that yellow bar, and I'm having so much trouble actually capturing in the console the problem. But I feel like we're close enough to getting this new site out that I don't think we need to spend too much time on it, but it just thought I'd let you know it bugs me. And that's my code too, I know. Mike said, had a quick look at the previous site last week. It's very much getting there. Yeah, it's looking really, really good. I so love looking at ads. Interestingly, and Stefan was there with Charlotte and I in December in Norway when we had our Norwegian designer who did the logo and the draft of the first website. And Michael, the designer, was saying, with a new logo, when you first see it, it might not resonate, but you need time to see it over and over and over again, and you'll begin to eventually love it. And we do. I love it now. I think it's such a cool looking site. Super, super efficient too. James says, law enforcement comment reminded me, I got to talk to Mark Weber Tobias a couple of weeks ago. I was taking to ask how they opened a lock with a hairdryer. Who is? I'm sorry, I don't know who that is, but that sounds cool. Drop a link in. Actually, you can't drop a link because YouTube comments. Joel says the terms of use link below the email form doesn't work. Yeah, look, some stuff on the preview site won't work. So the way we've done this is we've given Ingeber, well, effectively, he's got the same rights as everyone else on the preview site. You can go through and submit a PR if you like on the preview site. But we're using this preview site to build up just a purely static representation of the site. Now, my original thinking when we first got Ingeber on, and we wanted someone to effectively do a Bootstrap 5 vanilla JS version of the website, and just do reference implementations, and then Stefan and I will take the reference implementation for, say, a form, and then we'd build it into the add domain page or something. And Ingeber turned out to be so unexpectedly awesome. We're like, can you just build everything? And then we'll just like copy and paste, when I say everything, all the front end, we'll copy and paste the HTML, the CSS. He's since done a SAS implementation as well. We'll copy that into the other website. So now we're just getting him to build every single page there on this public repository. And then Stefan and I are literally copying and pasting into the preview site, which is a branch of the live running site at the moment. And Stefan, we've got to rebase that as well, because there's a couple of little things that we've pushed out to the live site. So, excuse me, we have an actual live site, which is not publicly accessible as yet because it's under development. I don't know how many things we've partly screwed up. It gives us a little bit more leeway to experiment without making it publicly accessible. But that site, we're making all the stuff work. So to your point about a link not working, yeah, we're fixing that. We know about that. Now Rob says, pay ransom, hackers release sensitive data anyway. And that's the roll of the dice. But you got to remember that the back in the day, ransomware used to be attacks against availability. So they would encrypt your things. There would be a key. You need to pay money to get the key. Now, to some extent, that was a clean model insofar as the threat was you don't get your data back. The terms of the agreement, for want of a better term, was pay us money, you get the key. You'll then see the key work, and sometimes that they'd provide several different files that you could unlock individually with like another key, and you could effectively have a proof that it was going to work. But ultimately, if you pay the ransom, you know immediately whether you've gotten the product or not, because you put the key in and it unlocks everything. Attacks against availability. And then we've pivoted in recent years, and it's become attacks against availability and attacks against confidentiality, because they're not just encrypting the data anymore, they're taking the data. And they're saying, you need to pay us, because not only will you not get your files back if you don't pay us, well, actually, you will get your files back because we'll put it in the public domain and everyone will have your files, and then all of your sensitive things come out. And that can be far more damaging. I mean, we often go through risk assessments with organizations where it's like, okay, well, what's the impact of loss versus what's the impact of disclosure? And disclosure is often far more damaging than loss. So that's what the attack has pivoted to. And Rob's made the very valid point here. It's thundering out there. Rob's made the very valid point that if you pay a ransom to suppress disclosure, you have no guarantees. And you're right. And there have certainly been cases where ransoms have been paid and files have still been released. From a business of ransomware model perspective, that's not good business. It's not good business for ransomware crews to take the money and then release the files, because what's the message that that then sends to the next victim? You can't guarantee the product you get delivered. You know, you got to be a respectable ransomware crew, for want of a better term. So these businesses are very dependent on reputation. And reputation is one of those things, as I was saying, about how hard it is to build and how easy it is to lose. So it's just not in their interest to release the data. I would have a very, very strong suspicion that in many cases where these ransomware crews say, okay, cool, you've paid, here's your decryption key, and we'll delete the data. I would suspect in many of those cases that data is not deleted. Now, it may not be released publicly, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if they're still sitting on it, and at some point in time when that crew winds up or the circumstances change, then it's monetized in other ways. Yeah, so yeah, you're right. You have no guarantees. Rob says this was the case when the ransomware hacker was the company admin and also the negotiator for company to pay the ransom. I think you're talking about Ubiquity. So that was the that happened there. that was a weird one, because Ubiquity's communications looked a bit odd on the outside, and then we later learned via Krebs from memory that one of the InfoSec people inside the organization was actually the person ransoming them, which was, totally messy. So, all right, folks, I am going to wrap it up there. Next week, we'll have a lot more HOBP UX stuff done and that we'll be able to talk on. And yeah, hopefully that's going to be looking pretty awesome by then. Cheers, folks. Have an awesome weekend.